one part of what happened with the SCO was, a clear statement of defiance. You want to go for us? Well, we're ready for it, and we're going to push back. Okay, and so the gloves are off. And what has been very apparent is Putin has made it clear that if these sanctions are imposed, as very likely they will, the Europeans are working on them now, then the SCO, then the special military operation is going to escalate. And they've given clear indicators of that. And there are changes coming.
You know, when Mr. Crooke says the gloves are off, that phrase lands differently today than it would have a decade ago. It signals we've crossed a psychological Rubicon. Moscow now feels it has not only the capacity, but the mandate to widen its objectives if the West doubles down. For anyone who remembers the slow motion buildup to Iraq in 2003, the lesson is clear. Once major powers decide escalation is preferable to concession, reversing course becomes exponentially harder. We should all pay very close attention to that inflection point.
One change is, first of all, there was an attack on two military centers, which had NATO troops in it. NATO military officers they call them hard hands, but they were military people in clothing. Then there were the attacks which we've seen on, first of all, the cabinet meeting building in Kiev just in the last few days. That wasn't an accident, wasn't a missile that went astray. It was a very clear warning that they are ready now to shift. Russia is ready to shift to decision-making centers, to decision-making people as being targets. If nothing changes and the war continues and America starts escalating and Europe continues to escalate against Russia. So there's going to be further attacks. There were already attacks just before this on NATO-owned properties like the Turkish drone factory.
Striking a drone facility linked to a NATO member is Moscow's way of saying, we can touch what you value anywhere in the theater. That's deterrence by demonstration. Washington tried a similar signaling strike in Syria back in 17. Remember how quickly diplomats scrambled afterwards.
Also on an American electronics factory. All these are really saying, okay, this is it. We've made our proposal to you. We will, quietly move to enforcing and bringing about a political solution in Ukraine. If you don't want it, we're ready for it. We've made the preparations in those talks in China at the SCO talks. We can survive your sanctions. We have covered all the vulnerabilities we have. You can see that tackling China is just pointless. China is too strong for the United States. And so this was a big no coming out of the SCO, a big no on many fronts, economic fronts, the military front, the political front, quite a defiant, not an aggressive, not a hostile, but a very clear no that says, the Trump-centric world is over. We're not accepting a Trump-centric world.
That single sentence captures the geopolitical realignment of 2025. The SCO bloc is effectively telling Washington, your unipolar moment is finished. Negotiate from parity or don't negotiate at all. It echoes de Gaulle's push for European autonomy in the 1960s, only this time the chorus is much larger and spans Eurasia.
I think the other thing that I know is being discussed, I'm not saying it's at all policy, but until now, they've given pretty much a blanket assurance to Zelensky that he'll never be touched. But I think they're getting really tired of him, and they're getting really tired of his sort of absoluteness. I mean, he has not offered anything, nothing, no movement on any issue whatsoever. and they're getting a bit fed up with it. So I don't know what's happening, but the attack on that the cabinet office meeting in Kiev, it was a token. It was just a signal, but it was saying, watch out. If you're going to stay in this position much longer, I mean, it's going to change. And as I said, escalation is coming with the SMO on military equipment, but also on the power system. And so it is something that the United States and Trump is going to have to consider.
Escalatory dominance is a doctrine born of the Cold War, but the world has changed. Financial leverage isn't as absolute with BRICS de-dollarization efforts accelerating. The question is whether Washington adapts to this multipolar reality or keeps relying on tools that may no longer deliver the same pressure.
And I think the big question, and maybe you can answer it better than me, is I mean, he's been told no to the main structure of his platform because his platform is really escalatory dominance, both at home and everywhere else. That the United States, either financially or militarily, has escalatory dominance to, if you like, set and maintain the financial dollar hegemony in the world. And it's going to use it. And he's just heard a very clear no, don't try it because we're ready for that from the SCO. So is he capable of changing? Is he capable now of going in a different direction? By all accounts, I hear that he's not very good at hearing no, that when people say no to him, whether it is in the courts or elsewhere, he gets very, very angry indeed.
If Russia begins targeting PASS, the power, airport, and security systems, it will push the conflict beyond the front lines into the daily lives of Ukrainians. That's a heavy diplomatic cost, and historically, civilian infrastructure strikes tend to harden political will rather than soften it. Crooke is pointing to personality as a variable in geopolitics. It's uncomfortable, but history shows leaders' tempers can shape outcomes. The Cuban Missile Crisis could have spiraled if Kennedy or Khrushchev had been more volatile. When policy collides with personal ego, risks compound in ways strategy papers rarely predict.
So Russia understands that. They understand who's behind him and who's pushing him, and that escalatory. They can't afford a peace with Russia because if there's peace, then there's no potential for later escalation against Russia. And that's, of course, why it was such a stupid question about what was the position of Russia about having NATO troops in it, that the man asked Putin. Because, I mean, what was the war about? The war was about to prevent NATO in Ukraine. And so to say, well, would you mind why shouldn't Ukraine have NATO troops in it? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. I mean, this is what the war was all about, the expansion of NATO and NATO occupying Ukraine.
Crooke circles back to first principles here. Wars that start over grand strategic anxieties, think the Cuban Missile Crisis, rarely end with a tidy ceasefire. Unless each side's core security concern is addressed, any pause is just that, a pause, not a settlement.
Before Donald Trump came into office, and did he, with his crazy tariffs, just accelerate this?
I think that the final impulse to this was in the wake of the Alaska meeting, the meeting in Anchorage. That meeting, and I think I've mentioned this before, essentially was that the Russians wanted to see how much room Trump had given all of the constraints, the sort of pressures that are on him of various sorts, how much actual room for maneuver did he have? How much had he really heard Putin's message about how to resolve the Ukraine problem? And so, yes, some of that, I think what came out of Alaska and Anchorage was it seems that Putin heard, the Putin's talk was heard and assimilated to an extent. And at that same time, Trump sort of indicated that he would push back, he wouldn't put any sanctions on, they would delay any action taken against Russia. However, that's proved to be short lived. Already, Trump is saying, no, he's going to do this. And I think, as I mentioned, I think last week, and I said, that I said last week after the Shanghai meeting, when there was uncertainty whether how serious Trump was. I mean, is he wanting war, or was he wanting peace, or just continued escalation? And they saw that there was really little sign of any progress towards a solution from the American side on Ukraine. I mean, remember, and Putin made a point of this because it's not been widely reported, but he said, unless there are changes in Ukraine, unless the martial law ends, unless there's a referendum able to be given, and if there is a referendum, there has to be presidential elections. That's the Ukrainians' constitution. And Putin said, I don't see any of that. I don't see anything of that happen. So this endless process is going nowhere. Quote, that's what he said. This endless process is going nowhere.
That phrase, endless process, echoes the frustrations many recall from the stalled Oslo peace accords. When diplomacy becomes theater rather than substance, publics lose patience. It underlines why symbolic meetings without concrete steps often backfire, feeding disillusion instead of building momentum.
Nevertheless, we are ready for a summit meeting, if necessary, with Zelensky. But really, he's saying, Zelensky isn't able to do what is necessary to endorse or ratify any agreement that emerges, even if there was a summit, even if he did meet with Putin, and there was something that came out of it. He isn't able to take that forward and turn it into a sort of lasting peace process. So there was a lot of skepticism, if you like, at the end of the Anchorage, and of course the delay was very short. Last week, I said to you that Putin had planned to ring Trump to say, look, we are going ahead. Nonetheless, you have to understand, we are going ahead with a special operation. Come what may, we're going ahead with it towards, if you like, forcing the outcome of a peaceful solution. Instead of taking that call, Trump decided to take a call with the alliance of the willing, the so-called alliance, the Europeans and others that are standing ready to backstop Ukraine as they see it. And what did he do? He spent his whole time haranguing the Europeans, saying, why are you still buying Russian oil? And if it's not Russian oil, you're buying Russian oil derivatives and and other goods from Russia. That must stop. In other words, he was pushing the whole sanctions effort away from the United States and saying it's Europe's responsibility. And Besant is now in talks, apparently, with the Commission to work out how to put new sanctions, how to avoid buying Indian refined petroleum products, which were originally taken from
How
Russian oil,
critical?
and put pressure.
Stepping back, we're watching a collision between two doctrines: escalatory dominance versus strategic depth. The West still believes more sanctions and military aid can tip the balance. Moscow and its partners believe time and geography are on their side. History suggests prolonged standoffs of this scale either evolve into costly frozen conflicts, like Kashmir, or erupt in ways no one initially predicts, as we saw in 1914. Our takeaway? Measured diplomacy now may spare everyone a far steeper bill later.